All right, so I'm making this video on request of Jeff. He sent me a question and was wondering what I have to say and think about ratchets. So I'm gonna try and give you a summary of what I own, what I would buy again, what I wouldn't buy again, what I would buy if I was starting out from fresh, which ones I use the most, what to look for. So this will probably be a little bit more lengthy, but I hope it's helpful to somebody. Okay, so ratchets are basically in three categories: 1/4 inch, 3/8, and 1/2 inch. If you are an automotive technician, you're gonna have all three. If you're doing like really heavy equipment, 3/8 is probably gonna look like really small to you, and you probably won't even have 1/4 inch. If you're into like electronics and smaller hobbies that fit on a desk or something like that, you'll probably just need 1/4 inch. And the average homeowner, like as an example, my sister is about to buy a house. I would tell her, buy a 3/8, set or something like that. So let's get started. The first ratchet I ever owned, which I still own, is this one. My boss found this in the cowl of a customer's car. It was rusted solid. It had been there for years. He put it in PB Blaster for a week, scrubbed it, and gave it to me as a gift. I've not used this in many, many years because I use these other two ratchets. It's very rare that I will reach for this one. And so while this is a great ratchet, it's old and outdated. And that outdatedness comes in the form of not that many, the gear doesn't have that many teeth on it. So you get like big swings when you go to use it versus a fine tooth ratchet. And it doesn't angle, the head doesn't pivot at all. And so I just always find myself reaching to these two. So this is one I would definitely not replace. And yet this is kind of like the most standard of all, like a 7 or 8 inch, 3/8 drive, run of the mill. And it works great, but once you have these, you probably won't use this. So Snap-on used to always have their pivoting heads with this style where the pivot is right over the head. And they've moved to this style now, which I don't prefer, although I recognize its advantage. So here's the advantage and disadvantage. When you have this on a bolt and you, let's say, can't get your hand here to steady everything and you can just grab here, as you twist, you're basically going to have an easy time transferring the torque by just holding out here into the fastener. Whereas if you have something like this, as you begin to lift, kind of the weeble wobble, if you will, starts to transfer not all of the torque into the fastener, but into this mechanism, and this thing kind of starts to move around. That's why some of these have a locking feature, which is great. In fact, you can get this same ratchet with a locking feature, but that can also be trouble sometimes because what's really good about this design compared to this design is the head is so much more narrow, and so it can sneak into places. In fact, what I'll often do is, you might actually snake your way through an engine compartment, something like this, where you go in and then you kind of turn a corner and then you get back and you kind of work the ratchet like that. And so if this was locking, that'd be a pain in the butt because you'd have to kind of push it in, unlock it, pivot it around, relock it. And so sometimes locking is great and sometimes unlocking is great. Sometimes this narrow head, because the pivot's down here, is good for sneaking into really tight places, but then it becomes problematic if you can't keep your head on there for the pivot, and that's why this one is superior. Okay, so this one is quite old, at least 20 years. I actually bought it used, and I've owned it for 17 years myself. And the number of teeth on the gear, I don't have it measured off the top of my head, but the number of teeth on the gear is a little bit outdated. Sorry, our new dog is chewing on everything. So what you'll notice is in the newer ratchets, the teeth are getting much, much, much finer. And that changes what I think is commonly called swing back, which is basically how far, like as I'm going this way and then I run into something, how far back can I move this before I can take another tooth? And that's really good when you're in tight areas. Now, the downside to lots of fine teeth is that those teeth have to be smaller. So basically, like, let's take this ratchet. Let's say there's 48 teeth in here. Well, to get 72 teeth in the same head, the teeth have to be smaller. And the smaller the teeth are, the more it's going to slip. And that's why, at least from memory, fine teeth came in on 1/4-inch drives long before they made their way into 1/2-inch, because the amount of torque you're dealing with on 1/4-inch is much less and the steel can hold up. Whereas on a big 1/2-inch ratchet, you're going to strip those teeth out. Now, if you have the ability to get it warrantied, well, that's great, but you still have to wait for the warranty to come through. So, that's what I have to say about 3/8 ratchets. What I would do is I would get a small, flexible ratchet. I would not get one either from Snap-on or anybody else with a handle like this. The reason why is because if you're pulling this one out, it's not because you got a bunch of torque you need to pull, it's because you need to sneak into some tiny little area and maneuver, and you want it to be as slim and compact as possible. Exactly the opposite of this. I mean, this is an angled head, right? And it's 1/4-inch drive, and it's about the same length. But in my mind, these are totally different, because this is for sneaking into really hard spots. This one is way more comfortable in the hand. It's nice and quick when you can get both hands on the ratchet to get on the fastener. This is what you want for sneaking into tight to reach places. And as a mechanic working in an engine compartment or under a dash, that's awesome. Now, this ratchet is brand new. The Snap-on guy replaced an older one that I had. But basically, 15 years ago, you couldn't actually buy this ratchet. This is a 1/4-inch ratchet with a 3/8 head, which is really handy because you tend to use 3/8 a lot more in automotive than 1/2-inch, than 1/4-inch. And so you tend to have a wider variety of sockets in 3/8 than you do in 1/4-inch. And then if you had this in 1/4-inch, then you'd have to have that same variety in the 1/4-inch range, which I didn't have. But now you can buy it just like this, 1/4-inch body with a 3/8 head. But you can also buy a 1/4-inch body with a 1/4-inch head. And my old boss had one of those, and he also had it locking. So we had the locking and the unlocking versions. So that's a little bit about that. Now, the other thing that's kind of, in some ways, I would say overlooked. Would you take tips, please? Is kind of overlooked is like just a breaker bar. This is a very inexpensive item. You can buy it from a cheap brand. You don't need to buy a high quality brand. And you get the angularness that you need and want. And because there's no teeth in here from a gear, this is just really, really strong, which is why I would say buy it from a cheap company or cheaper company. And so if you were really trying to build a great selection, or if you're really trying to build a great set on a budget, I would get something like this to break the bolts loose, and then something like this to sneak in anywhere and finish them off. Because in really rusted bolt applications, you might need high torque, not just to break it loose, but to get the fastener all the way out, because every single turn is a pain. But most of the time, you just need something to break it loose, and then you can kind of zip it off with something smaller and lighter duty. Okay, so 1/4-inch is kind of the same, except I didn't make as many good decisions when I was a tech. So basically, when I was a tech, I bought these three. And this is, in my opinion, overkill. This one, I wish I didn't own. I pretty much always would just reach for this one because it's basically the same length. I have a wider selection of 3/8 drive sockets. This thing doesn't flex. I wish I didn't own this. I also pretty much wish I didn't own both of these. This one is a fine-tooth one. This is kind of a standard, and I rarely find myself reaching for this over this because this is so much finer. Now, every once in a while, I'm working with 1/4-inch drive, and I do need something longer than this to break the bolts loose, and so this is nice to have. But honestly, I would say if I was doing it all over again, I would probably just buy these two. And then when I got into this length, when I needed this torque, I would move up to 3/8. So yeah, this is a little Snap-on guy, very fine tooth. He's really nice. This, I didn't discover until a couple years ago. This is essentially not a 1/4-inch drive ratchet. It's like a hex bit ratchet or a bit ratchet. The thing that's really nice about these is you can get into very tight places with like a Phillips or a slotted. Of course, you can use something like this, which is a long package, but you can buy really short stubby ones of these. Let me grab them, hold on. Like these. And with something like that, you can sneak into very tight places. And so this is awesome. This is from the company Wera or Vera. There's a bunch of manufacturers making these now, but this is the first company I saw it from. And so I bought it from that company. All right. The other thing that I own that I love, but I've never used is this thing. This is from Gear Wrench. Gear Wrench, I think, is a great brand. I have owned this set of ratcheting flexible gear wrenches for 18 years. I've never had any break. Every once in a while, this mechanism gets sort of stiff and you got to give it a good whack to loosen it up again. But other than that, they've been fine. So this is basically a 1/4-inch ratchet, and you can flip this back and forth. But what's nice is that it pivots this way and this way. So you can get into some really weird, tight spots with a very short package, And when you don't need a lot of torque, right? I mean, when you don't need a lot of torque, and you can just get it with your hands, it's really nice. Now, I bought this just a couple years ago, and sometimes it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. And so I think most of the time when I'm in a situation where I need this, I forget that I even own it. And I find myself, in there like this. But I would say this is probably a tool worth buying up front if you don't have one and if you're not already set in your ways. They make a 3/8 version, which is in red. I don't know how useful that is because typically with a 3/8 fastener, you're going to have a little bit more room to maneuver, and also you're going to need a little bit more torque. But I don't know, maybe I don't know because I haven't used it. The other thing that can be a really handy addition to any ratchet is something like this. This is an extension with a wheel. And what this allows you to do is, let's say you get into a tight spot and you need the torque of a longer ratchet to break the bolt loose. Then you broke it loose and you either don't want to go back in there with a different ratchet, or maybe you can't for some reason. And what's nice about this is that you can get in there with the long ratchet, but then you can just use your thumb and you can spin the bolt off. Oftentimes, the bolt is too stiff and seized to just spin the chrome. It's just too slippery and the diameter is too small, so you don't get enough torque. But something like this is nice. And since you probably are going to need to own a single shorty extension like this anyway, might as well get one with the wheel and the knurling. This knurling's actually not that good. This is from Matco. There's probably better ones out there, but if you look at the knurling as an example on these Vera, it's really good. And Vera puts it on every socket, or at least the ones I have. So you get that built in. That's an example of where I think Vera is a little more innovative than some of the other standard old school companies. Anyway, okay, so that's all that I want to show you. Same thing with the little breaker bar. What this is actually really nice for is applications where you need to tighten and loosen very quickly and often. A great example of this would be bleeder screws on calipers, where you loosen, let the air out, tighten, and obviously you can do that with a ratchet, but it's just nice to not always be flipping the switch back and forth. So little breaker bar, not really for torque, but just for a repetitive job like bleeding brakes. Okay. Then I have a couple 1/2-inch ratchets. I used to own 4. I had a shorty, a medium, then I had a medium swivel. When I say swivel, I mean this, the flex, and then I have this long flex. I regret all that. I bought these two and the one you don't see because I sold it again. I bought those used on eBay, and recently the heads were all slipping on me. The Snap-on guy sent me the rebuild kit for free, and to my delight, the rebuild kit was a finer tooth gear set. So I have, it's just a lot finer now, which is great. This one is great, but I will say I mostly use this as like a breaker bar. It was for a long time, it was my longest one. It's like maybe 20 inches, I think, not quite 24. And I use this as a breaker bar for breaking really super stubborn bolts. A better choice is to just own a dedicated breaker bar. Let me zoom out for you. a dedicated breaker bar. This one is 30 inches. I got this recently on Amazon for really, it's like a no-name brand. But the thing is, any manufacturer can take 2 pieces of metal and put a pin in it, and it's not rocket science. Inside of here is a relatively finely machined gear set, which not every manufacturer can pull off. So I am a fan of high quality tools, but I also try and recognize when you don't need that high quality and you can get by with something a little quicker and dirtier. So if I was redoing my 1/2-inch set, I would probably keep this stubby. And as you notice, the heads are identical. So I would just slide a pipe over the handle when I needed more leverage, because that's no different than this one. If the gear heads and sets were different, that would be one thing, but the gear sets are actually identical. When I sent him these 2 part numbers, he sent me the same replacement head. So just get a stubby so that you can get into tighter places, and then just get yourself a pipe from Home Depot. Just get some black pipe, gas line type pipe to slide over the handle. And then you don't need this guy. A flex one is nice. I don't know that you need such a long one. Again, this head is basically the same as the smaller head, so I'd probably get a shorter flex to save some money, and then just get yourself the biggest, longest breaker bar you can for the really nasty stuff. Okay, the last, well, I guess one oddball, my sister bought me this as a thank you for working on her car, and I do like the Vera stuff. As you may have heard in a different video, what I'm a little skeptical of is the long-term durability of these handles compared to something like this. When I work in the driveway, you know, this thing gets drug across the pavement, and eventually you're going to get so many burrs on this, it's going to tear up your hands to use. What I really like about this, and it's kind of obvious, but what I really like about this is that you can basically have it sitting around, and when you're going to work on something, you can just grab this, and you have a really good chance of having everything you need. It's really organized. None of the stuff comes apart because these are all on locking rails. They have this nice adapter so that you can get access to all the hex stuff with the same tool. The innovation is good. You know, this head pivots in 5 positions, including like this. And then it has this button on the back, so the sockets never basically fall out, even if you want them to come off, until you push the button. Then it self-ejects, which is really innovative. And then it has this little black collar so that you can spin things really fast and work very efficiently. I would say that like if you're doing rough and dirty work, don't buy Vera stuff, or at least don't buy the ones with these handles. They're just a little bit too German. And what I mean by that, and I lived in Germany for 3 years, I love the Germans, but the Germans wouldn't slide their tools across the driveway. They would, you know, place them there and then lift them and set them there somewhere else. I live in Chattanooga now, and it's just kind of a rougher, tougher environment where handles like this can survive and handles like this can't. So you know yourself, if you're kind of a little OCD and you like precision and you're real careful and you like cleaning up your tools after you've used them, I think Vera is a really, really good choice. Again, they're packing innovation and cost. I mean, it costs money to put those knurlings on there. It costs money to put the paint on there. It costs money to have a 2-piece rail design so that it locks. It costs money to have these collars. I mean, it's not just innovation to say innovate. It costs them something. And in the end, it's really beneficial and useful. So I would say Vera is a really good choice. But if you're like a total shop monkey, grease ball, shade tree type mechanic, and I don't mean that in a demeaning way, I think this stuff's a little bit like too delicate for all of that. Okay, last thing is torque wrenches. So I got this one at an estate sale. I got this one at an estate sale. I bought this one off of Amazon. This should be gear wrench. I will say this. I was not a mechanic who torqued everything to a torque spec. I know that almost everything in life has a torque spec, and even when it doesn't, you can look up the length and diameter of the bolt and you can calculate it. But I didn't work in a type of shop that taught that, and by and large, I don't think that's necessary. Now, if you're a mechanic and you're at a dealership and you're working on lots of customers' cars, first of all, you're going to memorize torque specs if you're at a dealer just working on one or two brands. And so you should use them. Why not? The problem, there's a couple problems. The first thing is that in order to torque things to spec, sometimes you have the same accessibility problem as loosening it. And that means you need swivel heads, and that means you need something that can get in tight corners. And so now you find yourself buying very expensive torque wrenches, also with these features at the end, with the angled head and all of that. And, you know, you definitely need torque wrenches when you're doing stuff with machined parts, like cylinder heads and all of that. There's no doubt about that. But you have to remember that every automotive manufacturer recommends and allows the customer to torque a wheel down on the side of the road and then go for a drive when they get a flat and they get a spare. So you kind of have to put things in perspective. Some mechanics act like it's an abominable sin not to torque a oil pan bolt down to spec or something like that, because, you know, it could be a leak and it's dangerous and it's just totally irresponsible of you. But remember what the automotive manufacturers are letting customers do. The automotive manufacturers don't really allow customers to do things that are dangerous. That's why they don't publish information on how to repair stuff. That's why they say don't touch this or that, just take it to the dealer. But there are millions of cases every year where people torque down with some tool that's in the trunk, a spare tire, and they go for a drive. And it's not unsafe. So if you are not mechanically inclined, or you didn't work on this stuff growing up, and you have just no sense at all of what torque to use, then buy a torque wrench. But I wouldn't recommend becoming a fanatic about it. What I would say, one other comment about torque, is most quarter-inch drive stuff goes up to 13 millimeters, starts at, in this case, 4. Most 3/8 drives goes from like 8 to 19, and most half-inch stuff goes from like maybe 13 or 12 to 28. So there's this overlap, right? And so you can torque something down which has a 13 millimeter head with a quarter-inch drive, but that's like at the far limit. Same thing with 3/8. You can torque something down that's a 19 millimeter head, but that's kind of at the limit. And so one thing that you can do to develop a sense of torque is to use the ratchets in the middle of the range. So in other words, like if you're torquing down something that has an 8 or a 9 or a 10 millimeter head, and you're using a quarter-inch drive, like you're not going to be able to snap that head off with this length of a ratchet unless you're really trying. If you have like a 15 or 16 millimeter or 17 millimeter head bolt, and you're using a standard length 3/8 ratchet, they have designed the range of sockets for the general diameter of bolt that you're going to come across and the general amount of torque that you need. Now, if you take a 1/2 inch to 3/8 and a 3/8 to 1/4 inch adapter and you put a 4 millimeter on the end of this thing, you're probably going to break the bolt no matter what you do, because it was never designed for that. And so I would just look at the kit that you have, look at the range of sockets, and if you're kind of in the middle of that range, like in this case, right in the middle, 8 mil, you're not going to be able to destroy, well, you can, of course, if you want, but if you just use a little common sense, you're not going to strip and destroy the heads. Okay, last two things to show you is, for my truck many years ago, I bought this kit, and it's from the brand Husky, which in general I'm not any huge fan of, but I think this thing cost me $55, and this is a great kit to leave in your car. And if you're not doing much, then this might be a great kit to own at your house. I mean, you get shallow and deep, standard and metric, you get a couple adapters, you get a couple different size ratchets. I mean, there's nothing shameful about this if this is, all you need. I would say one thing that would greatly improve this kit is a swivel. Hang on. Something like this. This will greatly diversify what you're able to work on when you can pivot and swivel a little bit. This is actually an impact swivel. Let me grab a normal one. Normal one looks like this. This just isn't rated for an impact gun. So, You know, buying a kit like this and adding that, I mean, that'll go a really long way. Adding that, so you get some knurling, that'll go a long way. I did buy a second kit for my truck because I'm not normally just taking care of myself. I'm often answering distress calls and helping people. So I bought this one. This is just 1/2-inch drive. I needed something a little beefier. And honestly, you know, even this DeWalt has the button that locks it and ejects it. And the teeth are relatively decent on here. So my point is, you don't need Snap-on, you don't need Vera, you don't need gear wrench, you know, if you're not using this stuff all the time. And if you can live a day or two with a failure. You know, a mechanic, if a ratchet breaks, the whole day stops. You know, if your whole day isn't gonna stop and you can wait a day or two to get something warranted, then don't feel compelled in buying the super, super good stuff. Okay, last thing I wanna say. For further reading, this guy, Project Farm, he's done a bunch of videos. He goes, you know, he basically goes out and buys ratchets from all the different brands and he subjects them to a lot of tests. My experience with him is that he's been very unbiased, quite fair, and I think it's a really great place to start, maybe even finish your research. I would say if I were starting over, or if I was a homeowner or something like that, I would probably start with this gear wrench 4-piece. You get 4 ratchets, you get basically standard lengths, 1/4, 3/8, and 1/2. They all flex, just like mine, and then there's a stubby, which you probably won't use that much. $112. It's hard to beat that. Gear Wrench is a great brand. Or if you are not so rough and tough and you're a little more careful and cautious with your tools, I would think of some Vera stuff. You know, definitely more expensive, but here's a 3/8. $66. If you don't want this handle and you don't want something that's going to get chewed up and all of that, they have the standard ones. There's that little bit driver that I was telling you about. And they have these in 1/4, they have these in 3/8. It's a little bit more economical to buy the set versus just the individuals, but you know what you need, you know what you want. But those would be like the 2 recommendations that I would say that are just easily available on Amazon. Gear Wrench is a great brand. Vera is a great brand, and either of those 2 choices, I would say you're going to be pretty safe. So, all right, Jeff, and the other person who watches this, I hope that was helpful for you. If not, let me know by giving me a thumbs down. Go check out Project Farm. You'll probably like his assessment of things more than mine, and I hope you found that helpful. Take care, folks.